Commission. Commissioner DeLarge, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And roll call. Commissioner Atkins. Commissioner DeLarge.
Here.
Commissioner Mace. Commissioner Caswell.
Present.
Commissioner Tellman.
Here.
Commissioner Kirshen. Commissioner Bresney.
Here.
Commissioner Helen.
Yes, here.
And the chair is here. Call to the public. Is there anybody that wishes to address the commission this morning? You pick whoever wants to go first.
All right, commissioners, good morning. My name is Peter Norquist, and today I wish to speak on the new draft of the Elections Procedure Manual, which I believe is one of the items that you'll be discussing today. Normally, a summary of changes document is released prior to the beginning of the public comment period, and it accompanies 2 town hall presentations and provides a summary of the changes. This year, although Adrian Fontes campaigned on protecting democracy, he only gave the public 15 days to review. He did no town halls and did not provide a summary document. These are some of the top issues in the Election Procedures Manual that I think still need to be addressed before any recommendation is given to accept. And I have divided these into category. So in terms of security, preventing backdoor internet and especially cellular connection like FirstNet to EMS machines. The legislature and the former AG have shot down these policies twice already. Fontes put them back in. Adding chain of custody records to and preventing the disposal of electronic storage devices. In terms of the voter rolls, closing loopholes on deceased voters remaining on the active voting list, requiring signature verification standards and procedures to be added back into the EPM because Fontes removed them, and stopping vast expansion of unsecured voter registration during an emergency voting window against the law. In terms of transparency, creating transparency at runback and early voting procedures, stopping the invention of new powers for government bureaucrats to block public access and transparency in our elections, and requiring transparency and traceability in duplication and adjudication procedures, preventing election officials from secretly overriding the decisions of bipartisan boards. In terms of ballots, requiring the votes of qualified voters standing in line at 7 p.m. on election day to be counted. Fontes tried to have these canceled. Preventing ballots from being taken across state lines or to non-government vendors for tabulation. Protecting voters from being unnecessarily forced to vote a provisional ballot as their only option when the statutes allow for a regular ballot to be voted. Protecting voters from having their votes stolen if a bad actor steals their early ballot and votes before they do. Preventing early ballots with unsigned affidavits from slipping through. This appears to have been a Fontes-created scheme, causing tens of thousands of likely illegal ballots to be counted in future elections, and requiring chain of custody and reconciliation of election day ballots. And then finally, voter disenfranchisement. Stopping ESG or DEI policies from determining where vote centers and precinct polling locations will be located. Preventing conflict of interest in the election canvass and certification process by enforcing current law. So in other words, the Secretary of State can't canvass their own election as they did in the last one. Requiring the implementation of existing new laws for early in-person voting with on-site tabulation. And finally, adding new contingency plan requirements so that the same thing that happened on Election Day in 2022 isn't allowed to continue and voters are no longer disenfranchised. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Please state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Sure. My name is Tim Locks. I'm just here talking about voter rolls. We had quite a discussion last meeting about the voter rolls. Sunday, at the end of church, I was approached by a couple that I know pretty well who said that they have been receiving mail from their daughter-in-law, who now lives in Virginia and has lived there for a couple of years, and asked what they should do with all this mail. So I told them, well, you can send it all back to the recorder. I said, or you can give it to me and I'll personally hand it to someone who can take care of it. I've also been told that you can go to pretty much any apartment building around town and find ballots just laying around there. I'm going to check that out. I hope that's not true. As we know, the voter rolls are just an absolute and complete mess. They get feeds from different locations, Eric being one of them, I believe. I'm still waiting on answers from the recorder's office on what the various feeds are that they do receive. But I don't understand if Eric is doing its job. It should have caught this person who likely has a new driver's license, and it should have updated our voter rolls. My biggest concern, however, is there is no statute that forces the recorder's offices to purge records from the file. So they will tell you that they're archiving these records, but we have no idea how they're archiving them, if they're putting them into a different database, or if they just put a flag on the record saying that it's archived. These are the kinds of transparencies that we need to understand. Voter rolls is one of the biggest issues. There are so many ballots that go out to undeliverable addresses. We still don't have any information whatsoever about how many undeliverable ballots were received at the last few elections and what their disposition is. So that's my concern. Once again, voter rolls. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Gisela Aaron, and I live in Pima County. I thought about what to talk about today, and I also wanted to talk about those two voter rolls and about the election procedure manual, but it's not possible to talk about everything I have uncovered and looked into the last couple of years of research. 3 minutes is not enough. I believe you have received this a couple months ago. About 2 months ago I sent that. Have you had the time yet to look at all of the information in there? Have you done your due diligence? If you did, you would know that none of the certificates, the recent certificates of the last two certifying 2 years each, have been signed by the chair of the commission as required by law. So that makes it null and void. I don't know if you know about the EAC. The EAC commissioners have been, it's an honor to have the job, but it's not their day job. They are judges and lawyers. That's their real jobs. And if they won't sign off on a certificate, I wonder why they don't want to put their names on those certificates. Do they know more what's going on at the EAC? I believe there's a lot of problems there, and I heard of it from some cyber experts in the last couple of days. They talked about how no machine can be secure. I ask you to get rid of the machines. We cannot trust them. I love America. That's why I'm here. That's why I spent my time researching all this and looking into it. I don't want to lose this country. I truly believe you can make a difference if you were to get rid of the machines and just go back to the ways we used to. I would like to know, and I know you can't answer, Connie, Ms. Hargrove, if we are using Albert sensors. They are behind the firewall. And they are, I heard from cyber experts, they are being used to tunnel into election machines, just so you're aware. I don't know if Pima County has Albert sensors, but that is one way of getting in. There are many others. For example, the cryptographic keys had been stolen in 2019 and a laptop. So none of our computers, none are safe because even cryptographic technology, whoever has that information, whoever stole that in Philadelphia in 2019, they have access to our machines, to our election machines, our most critical infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wants to address the commission? Okay. Next item on the agenda is approval of the June 16th, 2023 and July 21st, 2023 meeting summaries. Is there anybody that has any comments or changes that they'd like to make to either one of those?
Just want to compliment Vanessa for the really good job she's doing. Thank you.
Okay. Hearing none, those stand approved as presented. Next item on the agenda, update on re-precincting. Commissioner Tellman.
It's always strange that the person who requested this item is the person named, and I'm asking for somebody else to give this information. I would like to begin with the update on re-precincting, presumably from David Wisely. I'd like to divide the discussion into two parts. One are the sections that were left over from redistricting that obviously need to be cleared up, all those 0 and 1 or 2 voter sections. I don't want to, I'm not disputing that. But I would like to have a real justification for the other kinds of changes, merging of precincts and so forth. There are good reasons not to do this outside of the elections department, and I've given them in my statement. But I'd like to know what are the good reasons for doing each of these ones.
Okay, is it on? Yeah. First, if you don't mind, I will touch on why we do re-precincting. And because I think in some of the comments I heard, there was some confusion about that. One is when a precinct becomes numerically too large and numerically too many registered voters in it, we like to split them to make them more manageable. The other reason you re-precinct is to combine precincts, and that's basically what I've done with most of this. I don't think a lot of people understand that, and I'll start with the general election. For every precinct, you have to have at least 2 ballot styles, one with only federal races in it and another with the full races. And we can go into that, but you need a Fed only and a full ballot for every precinct. If you do a primary, that'll jump up to 8 ballots for every precinct, because you have to have those 2 styles for every recognized party. If you have a municipality in that precinct, we also do a local ballot just for that municipality. During a primary, independents or party not declared voters are eligible to pick. Currently, it's just the Democratic or Republican ballot. The Libertarians have theirs closed. I don't know how the no labels will go. But they can choose either one of that. If you're an independent, you can also say, I'm not a party member. I don't have to pick one of those. I just want to vote for my town council. And so we make a ballot available for that. Generally, you can resolve precinct committeeman races on your own. But if they go to the ballot, independents can't vote in that race. It is only available for people of that political party. So that would be another ballot that would have to be available. So in a primary, for each for a precinct, there can be anywhere from 8 to 10 ballots minimum. Then if there's splits, there's more. But so if we kept 10 additional precincts that we could combine, that's 80 additional ballots. And they all have to go through the same process of creating them, make sure the right districts are in it, then proofing them, and then testing them to make sure they function correctly on our system. We can't assume anything. We have to actually test everything to make sure, Then race, so that's, even races like the PPE that'll have only one contest, you still have to have a different ballot for each party. An additional thing you do when you're designing your ballots, you're required to do candidate rotation in certain situations. So even though you may have 2 identical precincts with all the same contests on it, they may have different candidate rotations. You still have to have a different one for each of those precincts. We also report results by precinct, so we have to have different ballots for every precinct. So anytime we can combine, if appropriate, that reduces the workload, makes us more efficient. And so that's basically why we combine precincts.
Can I?
Go ahead.
You gave 2 reasons. One is, quote, become unmanageable. I'm not sure what that means. When we had to have a voting place for every precinct, that really mattered.
Correct.
But that doesn't matter anymore now that we have vote centers.
I would agree as well. We would need to define lower and upper limits for precinct size if we wanted to discuss manageability.
Yeah, and merging precincts increases precinct size,
Yes, it does.
so that argument isn't really valid.
No, because the ones we are merging are small ones. And by small, I start to look at anything less than 1,000. And there's a reason I choose that number, which goes on more into the second part at vote. If we look at voter turnout, part of what we need to do is we are required to protect the voter's privacy. And as you get to smaller precincts, especially when you look at more granular data like segregated to early polls and provisionals, you see lower and lower numbers in typically the polls. Polls will have lower turnout than the earlies. And that's why I did that turnout paper for you, so you could see the actual numbers are often under 100 and sometimes under 20. It wouldn't take too much data mining to figure out, potentially figure out how people voted. By putting them in larger groups, that becomes more difficult. And I use a general, but it's worse for a primary because you're already you're doing additional aggregation by breaking them into precincts, into their party. You do allow independents to muddy the calculations a little bit, so it's harder to do, but then in the PPE, that's not allowed. So you get more, and you're less able to ensure voter privacy. And that's why I prefer to start at 1,000 and go up, but those are somewhat arbitrary numbers.
Okay, so you've given some reasons why particularly it would make it easier to have fewer ballot styles, I think is your main reason. I don't think privacy is a big issue when you have that many voters. But there are reasons that I can give for not changing the precincts and keeping the changes minimal. And they are, number one, that makes it much more difficult for the parties to reorganize. Parties are organized around precincts and precinct committee people. And when you change the boundaries of a precinct, you make it very difficult, especially when you merge them and you make them larger. You have probably about the same number of precinct committee people managing a larger precinct. You are allowed to have more, but there are very few precincts that have the full capacity, full number of precinct committee people. So it makes it more difficult. And most of the legislative districts parties are organized within regions within the district. And it just makes it, from that point of view, it makes it much more cumbersome to have to make all these changes. But to me, a more significant change is that every time you change precinct numbers and precinct, who's in a precinct, you make it much more difficult to analyze data from one election to the next. So if I want to know, for example, what was the turnout in precinct 22, and precinct 22 is now joined with precinct 46, it makes it much more difficult to do that. And especially since doing all this means you have to change the numbers. If you're going to have fewer precincts, you're going to have to eliminate your top numbers and renumber some of the ones down below. Every time you do that, it causes problems for the data analyst. And then I like just one more thing. It makes it easier for you, but I think it creates work for the recorder to have to change the precinct assignments for each voter and then issue new ID cards. So that is just another argument on the other side.
So your first one about precinct committeemen and their work, admittedly, I am not a precinct committeeman. I do not understand, or am not familiar with your function and or your organization. But it would seem to me that by combining a geographically large precinct with only a couple precinct committeemen with a denser precinct, that you now have a larger pool of resources. So if you have 5 in one and 2 in the other, you now have 7 to cover the whole territory.
No, that doesn't work.
So
Yeah.
how, I don't, okay, so that's my failing. I don't see how having potentially more people or functionally more people doesn't lighten the workload.
It makes you a much bigger number of people to have to reach from a small group, very small group of people.
Chair, before
Okay.
Pardon me?
I have a question.
Director Hargrove.
So, can you explain to me what the precinct committeemen actually do? I'm not sure I'm clear. I'm not in agreement or disagreeing with anything that's been said. I just am not clear what they do. If you would explain that to me, or someone can explain it to me, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, in the law, in the law, the precinct committeeman's primary responsibility is voter registration and getting out the vote. In addition to that, the precinct committee people work with candidates to help candidates win. They work with the party on issues. For example, there may be an issue on the ballot that they want to work with. So they have to reach a lot of people. And the idea is that they reach them by various means, either going door to door, phoning, or doing mailings, or a combination thereof. So when you have a larger and larger numbers of people for a small group of precinct committee people to reach, it makes it much more difficult, especially when you have some divided areas. For example, in the city election, we had some wards, some precincts were partly in one ward and partly in another. And so these people had to reach part of their people for one candidate and part of their people for another candidate. It just makes it more complicated. And people are, but to me, the biggest issue is, personally, the biggest issue is the data analysis. That I tried to analyze, say, turnout between 20 and 22. There were very few changes. There were enormous changes between 18 and 20. So comparing 18 to 22 is practically impossible. And the more you make changes in the numbers themselves and in the boundaries of the precincts, the less useful the data analysis is.
Commissioner Helen.
The other thing is that, for those of you who have not been or are not precinct committeemen, all party leadership comes out of the pool of precinct committeemen. That you cannot be a leader in your party, you can't have an office committee or party, unless you are a precinct, you first are a precinct committeeman. That's the pool of everything. So it's precinct committeemen are the resource for everything that's done during election time, prior to election time, etc. They're the worker bees, if you want a little strange.
Chairman Bickle?
But it's more than that, but we are worker bees.
Thank you.
Commissioner
Chairman
Criswell.
Bickle? Thank you. And I'd like to respond to that as well. Precinct committeemen are directly elected by their voters in their precinct. They're the closest to the voters in the precinct representing party. For each precinct committeeman in a precinct, they are to represent or contact the 125. 125 voters per precinct committeeman. That's how they are allotted per precinct. In large precincts, we have few of those precincts completely full, as Commissioner Tallman has explained. So that division of the voters is spread amongst the number of precinct committeemen in that precinct doing work. Typically, such as my own precinct, I am carrying the weight of hundreds of voters, not just representing my 125 for which I am allotted, the number within my precinct. So we are directly elected based on our voters. And so a larger precinct is very difficult when you are supposed to represent not only your 125, but because we don't have full precincts, we're taking on additional 125s on our responsibilities as precinct committeemen. And a precinct such as Precinct 84, let's take, which is a majority of the Quail Creek community. Inside Quail Creek, they're using alternative transportation, golf carts and stuff, bicycles, walking to meet their neighbors. But they cannot travel outside of that community onto the state highways and the county roads to do that same type of work they might do in their own precinct. So increasing a precinct like that, also precinct committeemen outside of a gated 24-access community don't have access into that. And that's one of the communities being considered for combination, creating a super precinct. A large number of voters. We do have 23 allotment down there for our Republican precinct committeemen, and it's usually 100% full as one of our precincts there. But it is difficult to do work within that community, having a larger area due to the demographics, the geography, the travel around that. And then, so I also want to say, precinct committeemen should never just be considered just as election time for petitions and other things. Precinct committeemen, being the foundation of the party, are constituent services for their party brand. Thank you.
Thank you. Follow-up? May I ask a follow-up question?
Director.
Yes. Thank you for all the information. That's really helpful. Before I actually get to the follow-up, I do have a question. Has anybody ever considered going to the legislature and asking them to cap the size of a precinct?
Yes. Bill Beard and I presented a bipartisan bill in 2018 that would add size of a precinct to the reasons for establishing precinct boundaries.
I think it needs to be presented again. I believe
Okay.
that it makes sense to
I'm not
present
done.
that again.
Yeah, I'm
Not
not
that
done.
will help us today, but that just makes sense.
We represented it in 22.
Okay. I absolutely understand all of that. As far as statistics, if we archive those particular precinct numbers, although you would still have to add them in somewhere, if we archive those precinct numbers and did not reuse them for a period of time, would that be helpful to the parties in determining turnout and things like that? So if we merged a precinct or we got rid of a precinct, we would not reuse that number. So then you're still looking at apples to apples for the period of time it was in place, but going forward, you know it's now combined with another precinct, and you'll be able to extrapolate that information. Would that be helpful?
That would be helpful in some cases. It wouldn't be in the cases where you want to redraw the boundaries, that whole layer, was it 3, where you wanted to actually move the precinct line up and change it, then that really confuses things.
Okay, okay. Would anyone have a problem with combining those precincts that have 0 voters? Would that be
No,
something you would be
I've
willing?
already said that's no problem. That's no problem at all. Those are remnants of redistricting, yeah. All of those have to go.
Okay.
There were, I believe, 12 precincts in the city election that had no voters in the particular ward.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that probably needs to change because they did have voters in the other ward part of that precinct.
Okay.
So cooperating with the city on those zeros would be really helpful.
And so that would be my first proposal, that if we can come to an agreement that we would accept those that have 0 voters, that we'll go ahead and combine those, because we will not have another EIC meeting before the board meeting that we need to make recommendations before the October deadline. So that would be the first recommendation.
So, Ms. Hargrove, that is
Yes.
your, I think you called it level 4, correct?
It should be,
It's throughout?
David, I'm sorry, Mr. Wisely, which one is the one that's not moving any districts? So I see that's,
Level 1. Sorry, level 1 is simply combining, so you're not changing anything. But on the level 4, I think it is, yes, there are a couple of districts where that have 0 registered voters, where it would need to change some district lines. I think those are JPs. No, that's the Board of Supervisors. So throughout the list, there are some scattered 0 registered voters or micro precincts that occur.
okay. And level 1, these are simply districts that none of the districts will change, but you're asking to combine these precincts. And so
Correct.
some of them are smaller precincts. It looks like the largest one is it 800?
There are a number of them where you're putting together 3, one of which is a 0, and then you're putting together the other 2.
Okay. So in the proposal for level 1, I don't believe any of these look like they're creating super precincts. Do you agree?
Some are geographically large,
Yeah,
but not
Just as
numerically.
geographically large? Okay.
yeah, that's the other point I didn't make, yeah.
Okay, so I'm back to my first, then, so I would, ask that if it is 0 registered voters in the precinct, would you agree that we can merge those?
Yes.
Or at least make the recommendation to the Board of Supervisors
Yes.
to merge those?
Or even in a couple of cases, there were maybe 4 voters.
Okay,
This is all fixing the problems of redistricting,
okay,
and I have no problem with that.
okay. I'm not a voting member, so I don't know, I can't make a motion. Does someone want to make a motion to that effect?
Well, I still got a discussion too, so.
Oh, sure.
Part of, after the May meeting, when this was first brought up, and David, right? David, I asked a specific question on how does this impact the number of precinct committeemen that a party would have? So I put out to our Republican Party legislative district chairs the information. For LD 17, our chair came back and basically said, we would probably lose 30 to 40 PCs countywide. Then that would also reduce our representation at the state level. I don't know how that works for the Democratic Party, but for the Republican Party, that's a non-starter. We are now having less representation coming out of Pima County statewide. Can't do that with any of the combining of these precincts. Go ahead, David. You had a question?
Yeah, if I may. From what I've seen, because most or a lot of precincts aren't, the allotment isn't full, you don't actually lose any precinct committeemen, you only lose potential precinct committeemen. And I don't know how your representation at the state goes, whether it's based on total active precinct committeemen or registered voters or what, so I can't touch on that, but you don't lose any actual precinct committeemen.
Chairman
Commissioner
McCullough can
Caswell.
answer. For every 3 precinct committeemen within a precinct elected, there is 1 state committeeman chosen for representing those 3 elected PCs. We're not talking appointed in the midterm, right, in the meantime. Only elected precinct committeemen qualify for state committeemen. And state committeemen represent 3 PCs. So when we go up to the state party, Maricopa County has 20 legislative districts that touch into their community. And so their allotments are a lot larger. And one of the things we have to keep in mind, because we do have a city-state there, is that most of the meetings are held in that community. So therefore, it's easier for them to be there. So rural communities have a lot harder time getting to those state meetings. And some parties have proxy use so that it allows that representation. But removing precinct committeeman allotment or numbers in a time where we are seeing some growth, and especially I think the numbers within the Republican Party I have seen for the PC ranks, that will make a great impact on the representation within party at the state level.
So if it is based on the number of elected precinct committeemen, your representation should not change based on these combinations because you do not lose any active precinct committeemen. It's just those unfilled places, those unfilled allotments that are reduced.
Thank you,
Well,
Mr. Wisely.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Wisely.
Actually, so let's take Legislative District 19. There were 74 elected PCs at the election time. And so divide that by 3, that was about 24 state committeemen that went up there. That number doesn't change, no. But right now, many parties are taking on new precinct committeemen that will be elected in the next process. So that may have a future effect on that.
Yes, Chair Bickle.
Director Hargrove.
Yes, thank you, everyone, for all of your information. And so I'm back to my original, just with the 0 registered voters. And I would love if, at some point, you could have each party, if you want to, someone who serves as a precinct committeeman on the local level, then someone who serves as a state representative, come and actually educate my office on what precinct committeemen actually do. I'm very interested in knowing. I completely understand that you need all of your positions, whether they're potential positions or field positions, to do the job that you need to get done. So I would propose just tabling anything else until after the 2024 election that we cannot agree on today.
I would support that we agree on, I don't have the numbers of the precincts, but the precincts that have 0 to a very small number of people as a product of redistricting be changed.
You want to make that motion?
That was.
We should give a number to that, the highest
Yeah.
number.
What's
6,
what's
10.
the ceiling on that small number?
Yeah, what's the
Would it be 0 to 50
Let's
or
say-
0 to 49?
Yeah, that's a good question. I remember some that are in
And
the
I-
single digits. Are there more that, some that are, say, 15 or something like that?
I see 28 to 6, another 28,
No.
45.
Mr. Wisely, a question. When you're talking about voters, you're talking about registered voters, correct?
Correct.
And I think that's an important distinction that we need to make too is, excuse me, you have to consider the fact that allocations of precinct committeemen are based on not just, I don't believe, registered voters, but registered voters in the particular party.
Correct.
So you could have a precinct that has 30 registered voters in it that you think is worth combining or not combining, but you may have 28 Republicans and 2 Democrats in there, which means those 2 Democrats can figure out who voted for who. So it's not just the total number of registered voters within the precinct, but looking at party breakdown within each precinct as well could cause potential problems from a data analysis perspective.
Correct.
Okay, so the largest number of these tiny precincts is 48, is that right? Is that correct?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, I make them, yeah. Okay. Constance?
If I may,
Director
Madam Chair.
Hargrove.
Yes, thank you. I wouldn't make a blanket proposal like that because, as Chair Bickle said, we do have to look at the demographics of that, the party representation of that precinct. If we take a look at the precincts and determine if they will not adversely affect any part of that, then I would say that whatever that threshold is that you give us within those parameters, then we would combine those. Does that sound fair to everybody?
No, well, so then you would have to bring this back to us before you brought it to the Board of Supervisors so we could have another look at it, correct?
We will not have another meeting before we have to
Right,
take it.
so I don't think that's a good idea. 0,
So-
I'm fine with, like, the level 4s and the other ones interspersed in 1, 2, and 3. I don't think anybody has an issue with those. But if we're not going to have another look at the proposed redistricting before this goes to the Board of Supervisors, and you're going to make changes in this timeframe, then I think that's a non-starter.
No, I agree with the precincts that were doing, what I'm supporting is getting rid of the precincts that were a result of redistricting and came up with a small number of people. If we could limit it to those districts, then it would be quite satisfied.
Yes, ma'am.
And David, can you tell us which ones are the result of redistricting?
I could look at them and probably figure it out. I've got probably enough things in front of me to be able to do that fairly quickly.
Yeah, that's the intent of the motion.
Just as a point of information, what Mr. Wisely is going to submit to the Board of Directors or Director Hargrove, whoever's name gets stuck on that, is a recommendation. And having watched this process for several election cycles now, the Board of Supervisors is not beyond saying, take your recommendations and stick them. We're going to do what we're going to do. So it really, I'm not going to say it doesn't matter what comes out of here, but the Board of Supervisors is not bound in any way, shape, or form to follow the recommendations that come from, because we had some significant issues, I believe, in 2016 where we were looking at combining several precincts in the foothills that would have made life miserable for the Democratic Party up there. And none of them got implemented by the Board of Supervisors, even though they came as a recommendation from the Elections Department. So, we can sit here and finagle and debate precinct allocations and sizes and mergers and splits, but the Board of Supervisors is going to do what the Board of Supervisors is going to do. So,
I agree with that, and I think the Board of Supervisors will be most resistant to the situations where you have to change a JP district or some other district in order to do that.
I agree on that.
So I would really limit the recommendations that come out from elections to the minimum that we can have and still deal with the redistricting problems that resulted.
So that being said.
Okay. As the chair,
So do we
I
need a
can't make a
motion?
motion, so if somebody wants to put this in the form of a motion,
I move that the Elections Department send to the Board of Supervisors a re-precinct recommendation that includes only those very small precincts that were a result of redistricting and combines those with other precincts.
is there a second?
Oh,
I have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion?
okay, so the very small number. I'm fine with the zeros that were part of redistricting at the legislative, for the legislative level, congressional level, and the super level. But the small precinct thing, yeah, I can look at the zeros, but the other ones, not at this time.
The reason that this ended up such a mess is that the redistricting commission was working from census data, from census tracts, and they did not have precinct numbers. So things happened that made sense to them from from census tracts that don't make sense from precinct numbers. And my only interest is in correcting those mistakes. For example, there's a tiny piece of Tucson Mountain Park that has its own precinct. That's ridiculous. So if you can identify those that were just the result of mistakes made through the redistricting commission, I think that would be helpful.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Creswell.
So for instance, in the level 2 precincting, we have an area of precinct 165 being combined with 229. You know, I wonder how Mr. Wisely considers that precinct, because although one precinct may appear smaller, the geographical area and the monuments of mountains and the access of roadways for that specific area, although might have a lower number of voters, but to access those areas in combination create over 40 miles of extra travel. So although I understand Commissioner Chelman's motion, I'm concerned that although we're using that standard of smaller precincts, the number of people in that precinct may not indicate the geographical issues faced by travel for party work as well. And that's my concern in such a statement.
I agree with that concern, especially the large precinct out in the Avra Valley. It doesn't have as people spread away out.
Precinct. The smaller of the two precincts there has had 831 registered voters, so I think that would have fallen under my anything smaller than 1,000 combination, but I no longer think it's part of this current discussion. So that wouldn't be something that's being considered at the moment.
Thank you.
I'll come back to it though, and then.
Any further discussion? Hearing none.
Can you restate the motion, please?
Commissioner Tillman.
Vanessa, did you take down the motion? I move that the Election Integrity Commission request that the Elections Department submit a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to combine those precincts that resulted from redistricting and resulted in a very small number of people in one of the affected precincts. And I'm going to leave it at the very small number and not deal with the 48.
Is what? 48?
Yeah. I'm not going to, I just, as a result of re-precincting is the key here.
Not re-precincting, redistricting.
Redistricting, I'm sorry, redistricting.
Okay, roll call vote. Commissioner DeLarge. Aye. Commissioner Mace.
Aye.
Commissioner Caswell.
No.
Commissioner Tellman.
Aye?
Commissioner Beresny.
No.
Commissioner Helen.
Yes.
And the chair will abstain, but the motion passes. And
And I
I
want
wanna-
to thank David for all the work. That must have been a huge amount of work to do, but I don't think it was appropriate.
okay, have we had all the discussion we're going to have on re-precincting?
Chair Bickle?
Commissioner
We
Beresny.
had the one motion for the combining. Now I want to look at splitting. We had two in level 2 precincting. We had two recommendations that came up. At least one. One was in one. In precinct 84 and combining 140. We have a total registered number of voters in 84. We have, and I think this brushes on what Commissioner Caswell said, with the Quail Creek community being a 55-plus gated community. Within 84 currently right now, we have three very distinct types of neighborhoods. We have Quail Creek, we have Madera Highlands, and we have La Posada. Madera Highlands is a basic subdivision, not age restricted. We have old guys like me that live there, along with, families with 2 and 3 children, and it works fine. We have another smaller, different community within Precinct 84 that is at La Posada, that is a very large, independent and assisted living community. What you put on this level 2 re-precincting with the type 1-4 community brought into that precinct of community into that precinct, rural 1-acre lots and so if we kept precinct 84, the footnote you have here, move the line from Duval Road to Quail Creek Parkway. And if you kept 84 intact, but put a dividing line where Quail Creek Parkway is, that makes that Quail Creek community, 55 plus, by itself, a very substantial portion of the precinct, make it their own precinct, and leave the other two types of communities that are in that precinct intact into a second precinct. So you would basically be moving the precinct 84 boundary to Quail Creek Parkway. Then you bring those communities south of Quail Creek into their own separate, or a precinct separate from Quail Creek. Another issue that we're looking 5-10 years down the road in those communities down there, the Madera Highlands community continues to grow. There's a lot of new construction going on in a couple of the different neighborhoods there. Quail Creek Parkway Quail Creek is expanding to the north. So we're going to have more registered voters in Quail Creek. We're going to have more registered voters in Madera Highlands in the next 3 or 4 years. So combining the 140 with 84 would have really created a mess for the precinct committeeman and the precinct captain for precinct 84. But dividing it now would be more manageable. And that's one of your mega precincts. That's the second largest precinct right now that we have in the county, Precinct 84. You know, right now, from the voter registration data that you presented to us, we have 7,210 voters. That's a big precinct. There's multiple neighborhoods. So that would be the only other recommendation that I would make, and I think it would have been proper to be a separate motion. So I move that we take Precinct 84 and create a second precinct by using Quail Creek Parkway as the dividing line between the two precincts.
I will second.
Have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion?
Chair Bickle.
Director Hargrove.
So similar to what we just did with the combining, we do not have time to come back before the board, the commission. With that, we do not have time to, once we rework the numbers and take a look at how that can be done, we won't have time to get it to the Board of Supervisors for this year. So it will have to happen in 2025 if we do it. So it gives us actually a couple of years to discuss and really work out what these precincts should look like, as opposed to a month and we're trying to make these decisions and move forward. That's the only thing I wanted to say.
Commissioner Tellman.
I agree with that, and I think there are probably other situations where we have a lot of new voters moving into an area. For example, the huge number of apartments that are appearing south of 39th Street along Park, Keno, and you're probably going to, at some point, have to create a new precinct for some of these really rapidly developing areas. And so I would suggest that we make this the task of the next year. We can, I believe, submit a re-precincting request within the 2-year period. We can do another one after a year if it's necessary for taking account of growth.
Mr. Wisely, we cannot do this in 2024, is that correct?
There's no legal obstruction, but we would not have time. Yeah, we're going to be a little bit busy.
You don't want to do it
Yeah,
before
but
the
it's a
general
general
election.
concern. I would say it's a general concern with rapidly growing areas and lots of new
Mm-hmm.
apartments. You're going to have to do some of that. But I don't think we can predict it right now.
Okay.
Any further discussion?
I'll withdraw the motion.
And your seconder agrees?
Yes.
Okay, the motion is withdrawn. Anything else on re-precincting? Moving to the next item on the agenda, an update on Governor Hobbs' Elections Task Force.
Request for anybody who was there?
Is there anybody that's
No, it's
participated in any of those meetings? Deputy Recorder Heiser? I know the recorder is on that commission.
Yes, thank you, Chair Buckle. The recorder was unable to attend today. She had prior commitments. I am here to give a report for her. The Governor's Election Task Force has been working in 5 working groups. Those 5 working groups have met within the last week. And have provided 20 possible ideas, which were presented in each of the 5 working groups. So the 5 working groups came back together. They presented 20 possible ideas. The goals for the ideas going forward were that they were to be bipartisan, and they were to be actionable, meaning that they would have a legislative action change or a policy action change or an operational action change. Those 20 ideas will now be moved to, the 5 working groups are getting reshuffled into new working groups, and they're going to take each of those ideas and work through them. The ideas are being continually fleshed out and refined, and then they will be bringing those ideas as export to the governor. The expected date is sometime in October. The recorder did not have an exact date as to when that would be. The 5 categories of these particular ideas fall under 1, election administration, 2, early voting, 3, election day and after, 4, election equipment and security, and 5, voter registration. So among those 20 ideas, they will fall within those 5 categories. I do not know what those 20 ideas are. I am not a member of that commission, but that is the information that I was given to update the EIC. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can within the scope of what I know.
Do you happen to have the information or a breakdown on which of the 20 require legislative action, which are procedural, and which are operational? Just a number?
I don't know.
Okay,
I'm
so
sorry.
we could have 7, 7, and 6, or we could have 19, 1, and 1.
As I have not seen what those particular recommendations are, I do not know. Sorry.
Do you know if they've been made available to the general public in any way, shape, or form?
I do not know what the status of that is with the commission. It is a public commission through the governor's office. I believe that information would be running through the governor's office.
Okay. Anybody have any other questions for Deputy Recorder Heiser? Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda, discussion of the Secretary of State's Elections Procedure Manual draft. Commissioner Tellman.
I did review chapters 8 through 14 of the draft, and I submitted some personal comments. I didn't find anything really major, but I submitted a number of particular comments on details. But I agree with Peter that the public participation part was absolutely abysmal. Not only would there only a 2-week period, but it wasn't advertised when it began. So some of us only found out, say, a week into the 2-week period that this manual draft was even ready. There were no public hearings scheduled, and in the press, when Secretary Fontes was asked about this, he said, well, I got all the input I needed from the recorders. And I think that was unfortunate. And apparently there's, according to some articles in the Arizona Republic, there's been a lot of criticism of it from that point of view, and some criticism from both the Republicans and the Democrats on very different issues.
Any other comments or questions?
Anybody else been following it?
Commissioner Caswell.
Thank you, Chairman Bickle. I appreciate those comments, Commissioner Tellman. I, too, am very concerned about the public trust. That's one of the reasons our commission exists, is to provide public trust. Everyone is aware that the elections have been in question from many years now of issues that have been arisen, and for us not to do our best to make sure that we have engaged with the stakeholders and the public and all the parties in the communities of interest and allow a proper time for the public to review the information, for it to be disseminated also with the summary of changes, which I know a very brief one has been posted on the Secretary of State website now. I just feel is really in error. In hindsight, maybe it was read, and so I was not able to even get through the elections procedure manual completely myself because it is a lot of pages, and we had such a very short time for review. So I'm very upset, and I share your sentiment in that a longer period of time for public comment, and those town halls should have been a part of that process. Thank you, Commissioner.
Any other comments?
Yes, I do.
Commissioner
Commissioner yeah, thank you. And Commissioner Tillman, Commissioner Caswell. And I have a general question, I think, for Ms. Heiser, Ms. Hargrove. What is Trump? Arizona Revised Statute or the Election Procedure Manual? What is Trump in the state of Arizona? What is Trump? And not President Trump, okay.
So so are you asking,
Who would the elections,
what is the authority?
what would the elections department and the recorder's office turn to first and say if there is disagreement in between the state statute and what the election procedures manual is, which one do you choose?
Well, obviously, I would choose the statutes and get a legal opinion from my county attorney. So if there was
Okay.
conflict, I would definitely go with the statutes.
Okay?
Yeah. So the same thing with the recorder's office. The statute is the controlling body of legal precedent. So what the statute says, we follow. The EPM, and I think a little bit of a clarification on the EPM as it's been presented in publicly has not been quite accurate as to the process. When we started the process of working with the Secretary of State's office and all of the county elections directors and county recorders, we were told that the manual presented by the draft manual presented by the Secretary's office was the 2014 manual, because the 2014 manual was a manual that was more stripped down. The intention of the Secretary of State when working with the elections departments and the recorders' offices throughout the state was to provide sections that were based solely on statute. So what was legally bound, the EPM is considered legal. It has the force of law once it is adopted. So I believe the Secretary of State's intention is that the information contained within the EPM could go directly back to the specific statute that it is in reference to, and is just simply a clarification of that statute. It is not guidance. It is just the taking something of a statute and putting it into layman's terms, basically, is the concept that the EPM has taken this go around. So a lot of the information that was previously in the 2019, because elections procedures manual, the Secretary of State removed because he considered it to be guidance only. Further, that went beyond what the scope of the statute stated. Those sort of guidance items will be presented to both the elections departments and to the recorder's offices as supplementals, as best practices for certain operations, but those do not have the force of law. I hope that answers your question,
Yeah,
Commissioner.
because, I've read reports and coming from, leadership in the legislature, the Secretary, meaning the Secretary of State, inappropriately decrees that counties do not have the authority to conduct hand counts. Okay. The Secretary ignores directives from a law passed this year requiring instructions of Arizona's prohibition on illegal ballot harvesting to be provided to voters who are caught casting early ballots. So we've seen some, distortion or this best guidance that contradicts what we have in the legislature or what we have in law. So that is my concern. Okay, with the EPM that is written. And another thing that I note, and there was one thing that I note, I read was the active early voting list, to move that current two-cycle not voting, just bypass 2024 and move it to 2026. So we would have a 4-year spread with general elections going on without a cleanup of the active early voting list. That means that there's just more people out there that are on the AEBL that, to me, causes problems.
Commissioner, as it relates to the statement on the active early voting list, what I have read through the draft EPM, it does not imply that. That particular piece of legislation is to become active. So in 2025, we are mandated to look at a 2-cycle, so 2 full election cycles, so the 22 cycle and the 24 cycle, with starting in 2025, we are to look and see which voters who are on ABLE have not returned an ABLE ballot. And it's, once they have met those two particular requirements, we are to remove them from ABLE. Now, again, the process of doing that will be further fleshed out in those supplementary papers and guidance from the Secretary of State's office to the county recorders on how we do that. That will now, information would have previously been in the EPM that will now not be in the EPM. They will be in additional guidance papers given to the recorder's offices. So we can all be doing the same procedures as we are enforcing that. But I did not, at no
Okay.
point in time when I was working
Completing
on the EPM draft, did I ever come away with that impression.
So you're completing right now in 2023, the 2020 and 2022 cycles, correct?
Yes, our understanding
Yeah.
of the law is that that goes into effect in the during 2025. So that law becomes effective for us to look at people who have not returned an ABLE ballot within 2 election cycles. They are to be removed from ABLE,
So if it goes into effect in 2025, it is the 2020
process as it is.
elections.
Our understanding of that process as it is right now is that the law becomes effective in 2025, and we are supposed to use the 2 federal election cycles. So our understanding, until we are given further guidance by the Secretary of State's or our council, is that that will be the 22 and 24 cycles. That's our understanding. Now, that is open for change, because that is one of the pieces of legislation that I do believe is still under litigation. So that may change depending upon the final resolution of a court. So we are, and we will, quarters monitoring lobby rolls active in 2025, and we will be monitoring the voter rolls of individuals who are unable, who have not returned a ballot. It is site 2 to 24. It will be 24 to 26. It's a 2-cycle period. So at this moment in time, we are still waiting on clarification, because as I stated, that particular piece of legislation is under litigation.
And
There are several pieces of legislation that are currently in litigation that we are waiting on a conclusion from the courts for.
yeah, a bunch of it, yes, and I understand that. I think the confusing thing to a lot of people, I mean, right now, we're in the 2024 election cycle.
Well,
We're in the 2024 elections. The election cycle is it's when the election cycle ends. We are not in the 2022 election cycle.
so for terms of voter registration, the ABLE issue aside, so we'll table that. In terms of voter registration, after the 2024 election cycle concludes, we will do a removal of voters from our voter rolls. We do that after every major election cycle. So if you would like to say that the 2023 and 2024 constitute the 24 election cycle, yes, I guess you can say that. If you want to do 21 to 2022 constitutes the 22 election cycle. But either way, in January of 2025, the recorders across the state of Arizona will remove people from the voter registration rolls because a federal election cycle has ended. At that time, we may also be removing people from ABLE who have not returned an ABLE ballot during that time frame, but I do not know that to be a true statement at this moment. I am, again, waiting for conclusion of litigation.
So you're using the federal 2-year election cycle.
Correct.
And I'm going to assume, and I know that gets us in trouble a lot, but I'm going to assume that the state election cycle mirrors the federal election cycle.
It does.
Okay, and for reporting purposes, from my perspective, for campaign finance reporting purposes, I am currently reporting in the 2024 election cycle. That's what I put down on the documents that I file with the Secretary of State's office. So,
Well,
no, we are currently operating in the 2024 election cycle. And if we can't all agree on
I agree
which
with you.
election cycle
Okay.
that we're operating in, then we got bigger issues that we need to discuss. But everything that I get now from the Secretary of State's office as regarding reporting that I have to do on behalf of the county party, it is the 2024 election cycle, which started on January 1st of 2023 and will end on December 31st of 2024.
I will defer to you, Chair Bickle, on that one.
And I guess the issue becomes, because when we were talking about during the legislative process, talking about what defines an election cycle, because Pima County has a major election every year, if you throw in the Tucson City elections, was it you don't fill out your AVOL ballot for one, what constituted the number of elections that you got to not submit an AVOL ballot for? Because people that don't live inside the city of Tucson are going to be subject to one purge period criteria, and people living in Tucson would be subject to a different purge period criteria. And I think they finally got to the point where they agreed that it was the federal 2-year election cycle is what we're talking about. Correct?
That is correct, except I want to make sure that you're not conflating the City of Tucson election with a Pima County consolidated election, because school districts, cities, and other special taxing districts have the authority to call elections and call them all vote-by-mail elections. Those are excluded from that concept of the people not returning an AVOL ballot. So the legislation in question that we are discussing in that statute is specifically referring to when we mail out ballots for a consolidated election that the county as a whole is running. So in this instance, it would be the primary, the 22 primary, the 22 general, the 24 primary, the 24 general. Those would all be considered AVOL eligible, as would the PPE, because AVOL voters who would be voting in the presidential preference. So it's those elections that we're looking at. So if an AVOL voter does not return an AVOL ballot at least twice, so they've done let's say they got a ballot for the primary, they didn't return their AVOL ballot. They got a ballot for the general, they didn't return their AVOL ballot. That constitutes the 2 within the cycle. Then it would be, as our understanding of the legislation that is currently under litigation, is that we would remove them from the roll. However, if they returned the AVOL, the next time they received an AVOL ballot, and they returned the AVOL ballot, then they are still good.
So is it 2 AVOL ballots per election cycle or 2 AVOL ballots per 2 election cycles?
Our understanding is it is 2 AVOL ballots for the cycle, not per election. That is a source of unknown to us as well. So that is why we are waiting on the litigation to be completed.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you have to vote every ballot in an election cycle,
You have,
unless it's a presidential election when you include the PPE as well. So you'd have to vote 2 out of those 3, or submit your AVOL ballot for 2 out of those 3.
yes, so if you had 4 ballots go to you as an AVOL person and you mailed 2 of those AVOL ballots back or dropped 2 of those AVOL ballots back, you would meet the threshold requirement, you would not be removed. So I think that the expectation that there are many people who do not return an AVOL ballot, I think that is not correct. Turn their county. Most AVOL voters
Let's keep it tied up in
county return
for
their AVOL ballots.
let's keep it tied up in litigation for a while longer.
I have no idea as to when that litigation will be concluded.
Okay. Commissioner Tillman.
I think you made a slip of the tongue when you stated earlier that being removed from the voter rolls, isn't it just being removed from the Eval rolls?
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Tillman, I did misspeak. It is to be removed from AVIL only. It is not to be removed. The voter registration is still active. They just will no longer get a ballot by mail if they're off of AVIL.
Any other comments or questions?
Yes, Commissioner.
Commissioner,
Chairman.
Commissioner Caswell.
Chairman and Deputy Heiser, how would that voter then, not having returned AVIL for 2 cycles, moves to a situation where they're not getting the mail-in ballot, so they're not going to get the AVIL ballot? When do they go to an inactive status? When does that inactive status come in?
So the inactive status, that's the NAVRA status. So a voter goes to a NAVRA status when we have sent them official election mail, and that election mail is then returned to our office. Once that return has happened, we put in a note code to our system, and in that note code, we have said that we have had a return of mail. That note code then inactivates that voter at that point in time. Then we send additional correspondence back to the voter. If we continue to have within a period of time still no response back to the voter, then that voter is then considered a canceled status or an inactive status. So everyone who has been in a canceled status on January 1st of 2025, those people will be removed from the voter roll. If a voter is inactive in the system, which just means that the NAVRA process has started for them, and they then show up at a voting location or an early voting location, or they contact our office and they update their voter registration, then they go back to being in an active status. It is really important to remember that just because a voter is inactive does not mean that they are not eligible to participate in an election. It just simply means that they will not, if they are unable and they're inactive, they will not receive a ballot by mail. Does that answer your question, Commissioner?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Next item on the agenda, discussion of plan November election.
Asking for general, who's on the ballot? Is Vail on the ballot now? And since this is an accuracy test and hand count audit.
Director Hargrove.
Chair Bickle, Commissioner Tillman. So there is a consolidated election with the city of Tucson, and schools have, they have bond election that will be all mail.
In
So,
which school districts? How
so
many? Yeah.
Alta Valley, Sarita, Tucson Unified School District, Flowing Wells, Sunnyside. So those are all bond elections. And so it will be, they've contracted with us, it is an all-mail election. It is, all elections are subject to logic and accuracy testing, not from the state, but we will have to have logic and accuracy testing before the election. So that will happen. Hand count will not happen after the election because as we looked at it and we had a discussion in the office, the offices that we're allowed to count are actually not on the ballot. So we will not have a hand count audit after the consolidated election in November. For the Vail election, they did turn in their petitions. The recorder's office did certify that they had enough signatures. We have sent that to the Board of Elections. It is on the agenda for the August 21st meeting. So the board will then call the election for Vail. It's an incorporation election, so they cannot have an all-mail election. So the Vail election is actually, we will have 3 vote centers open in Vail for the Vail election when the Board of Supervisors actually calls that election.
So there'll be a separate ballot just for Vail, and then they'll get the rest in the mail?
Yes, that is correct.
You said there were going to be 3 vote centers open. Is there going to be any early voting for the Vail incorporation election.
Thank you, Chair Beckel. We are trying to investigate a location for early voting. We had hoped that we might be able to use one of the vote center locations that the Elections Department was using as an early voting location. Unfortunately, those proposed sites are schools, and we stay open for a week, so we cannot set up an early voting site at a school and disrupt a educational opportunity. So we're currently looking for space in the Vail area to be able to set up a week-long early voting location there. We have not secured a space yet.
Thank you. Anybody have anything else on the November election? Just as a curiosity item, even though it's a consolidated election and Pima County is conducting it, could the city do a hand count of their ballots if they wanted?
Well, my response to that is that I am not an attorney and I cannot give legal advice.
The city ordinarily does a hand count conducted just by staff on election night.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And Chairman Bickle, I had a question still
Commissioner
on the
Caswell.
early voting center for the Vail locations and such. Are you currently hiring for positions to help with those voting centers? Have you already have staffed for that? Do you need any help for the elections department side as far as the ballot board kind of issues and or tabulation? And the same for deputy or anything, recorders, any hiring process currently open, or do you have the workers necessary?
Thank you for that question. So for the vote centers, we do have all of the poll workers that we need. For vote centers, we will open a requisition to hire additional for individuals to work on the early board to process ballots. For the election, we have workers, a group that will be returning of experienced board workers. So we will open a requisition to hire. We're probably going to hire, how many are we hiring? About 8 board workers and maybe 6 individuals to work in the counting room. We're adding to the number because we're going to utilize electronic adjudication for this election, and so we need additional people to do that.
Thank you, Commissioner. We are actively hiring for the ballot replacement sites for the consolidated election. We have been actively reaching out to our experienced staff members and letting them know that we are doing for all intents and purposes, a full-scale election for November, so we will be staffing up to our normal levels that we would staff up for a general. So we will be staffing 15 ballot replacement sites. We're reaching out to, I guess I said, experienced individuals, see if they would like to return for us. We'll be staffing a site in Vail, so that makes 17 total. And our signature verifiers have been returning to us, so they, most of the experienced ones have come back. The people that we hired for the special election in May and the primary, they will be coming back for us as well. So we will also be staffing up again for couriers and things like that. Those positions are always open, and so we're always accepting applications on those.
Thank you. And to follow up, Chairman Bickle, is there party observation being allowed or requested from the community there, or in regards to the other consolidated elections and school bonds? Do you have an observation program growing? Normally, I know the parties organize observers during the primary and general elections, but being that we have a few special elections here, are the parties also invited in that process and organizing for that observation?
Commissioner Caswell, yeah, thank you for that question. Well, by statute, number one, anytime there are voted ballots in our possession, and we are working with them, we're elected to have party representation. with any others asking for their list of observers for the election. And so, yes, we will have observers in every area, and I would just kind of outline for them where we would need them, and if we're adding a section, then they could add more people to that section if they need to. So, yes.
Excellent, thank you very much.
Anything else? Moving on to the next agenda item, discussion of equipment certification. That was put on there at my request before I lost consciousness for a period of time and had surgery. And there are some things that I'm investigating. Gisela, I have your information. And there are things that I'm looking for to either affirm or dispute your particular position. I'm going to defer this to next month's meeting as far as any discussion from me is concerned, because I haven't found what I'm looking for yet, and I don't know that I can, but it has to do with certification versus recertification of VSTLs. So anybody else have anything? Okay. Future agenda items. Vanessa, if you'll put the early voting question back on the ballot or on the agenda again in September.
Chair Bickle, this is not an agenda. A supervisor staff that we have these meetings broadcast over the county's WebEx capability again. Because I don't think we have it going on right now, correct? Is that correct? Okay, so this room does have the capability of providing that WebEx, so somebody does not have to be in attendance in the room to watch the meeting. I sit on the Transportation Advisory Committee also in this room, and we WebEx that every fourth Tuesday of the month. So just requesting that we have that broadcast again, like we had it when we were at the Board of Supervisors hearing room.
I had nothing to do with implementing that program, and I had nothing to do with deleting that program. I don't know who controls that function. I don't know whether that's the Board of Supervisors or whether that's the county administrator or who does it, but and Commissioner Tellman, I think, has been on this commission longer than I have, but we've had times where we did nothing, and then we've had times where we were on live TV through the CCTV system. So how that happens or who's responsible for that, I have no idea, but who does that, and if we can't do it, why we can't do it, and I'll reach out to my supervisor, who I'm personal friends with, and we'll see if we can make it happen. But it's not something I've ever requested or ever asked to go away. It just kind of happened for a while, and I think part of it was because of COVID. They were broadcasting all the meetings that the county had, and that has fallen by the wayside. But if they're willing to do it, I certainly have no objection to it.
It dropped off for this commission when we moved from the Board of Supervisors hearing room to here.
And I know that PCTAC was always broadcast because I came to a bunch of those meetings trying to get some road work done. So there's obviously a preference as to what gets broadcast and what doesn't get broadcast. And I believe there's probably somewhere between 50 and 60 boards, committees, and commissions. And I don't know that they broadcast all of them, some of them, none of them. I don't know, but we'll make an effort to do what we can to get it broadcast. But I make no promises because I have no control.
Okay, well, thank you for the consideration, and Vanessa, thanks for looking into that. Thank you.
Anything else to go on future agendas? And again, if something comes up, please get it to Vanessa and we'll get it put on the agenda. Next meeting date is September 15th, 2023. I am not going to be in town that date. I would like to put it off till the 22nd if that's possible, if no one has any objections.
I don't care, either way is fine.
No objection.
I have no objection.
I have an objection. I have previous engagement.
Engagement on the 22nd as well. I have an engagement on the 22nd as well.
Okay, well, Vice Chair Helen, you'll be doing the September meeting then.
Goody, goody, goody.
And I will not be here, I will be at another conference.
We'll leave it as scheduled on September 15th then. But I'm going to be somewhere in Arkansas or Texas, I think.
I'm leaving on the 19th.
Okay. Anything else that needs to come before this board? Hearing none, the meeting stands adjourned. Thank you all.